The Nile whispered secrets in the hush of dawn as Anippe knelt beside its edge, her arms trembling as she unwrapped the linen from her newborn son. He was barely 2 days old, skin soft as milk, eyes sealed shut like the world itself refused to witness what she was about to do. Her heart slammed against her ribs, not from the rush of footsteps, there were none, but from the weight of a decision that no mother should ever bear. She pressed her lips to the boy's forehead one last time, then placed him in the reed basket woven by trembling hands under moonlight. The basket floated gently, bobbing on the current like a blessing or a curse. No one could say which. In the distance, the city of Thebes stretched its bones, unaware that a secret had just been released into its lifeblood. Anippe crouched low in the grass, watching her child drift into the mouth of the Nile, vanishing between stalks taller than herself. She didn't weep. She had no more tears left since the night the high priest caught her sneaking from the temple halls, belly swollen with shame, whispering the name of the father she dared never speak. In the chambers of the gods, such sins earned death. Or worse, her son's cry echoed once, then was swallowed by the wind. She ran, through brush and sand and shadow, until she collapsed at the edge of a field where men worked, their backs turned. She buried her face in the earth, praying it would forget her. But the Nile forgets nothing. A day passed. Then another. At sunrise on the third, a fisherman named Khemu noticed the reeds swaying unnaturally. He wasn't supposed to be there. His usual fishing spot had been overrun by crocodiles. But something pulled him to that place, some voice between the wind and water. As he stepped closer, he saw the basket, tangled in papyrus stems, a small hand poking from its edge. He reached for it without thinking. Inside, a baby slept, impossibly quiet. Khemu's heart tightened, not in fear, but in recognition. Years ago, his own wife had miscarried their only child. Since then, he had walked alone, speaking only to the river and the ghosts it carried. Now, it gave him something back. He looked around for any sign of the mother, but found only footprints that led nowhere, as if the earth had swallowed her whole. He took the child in the basket, wrapped them in his cloak, and turned back toward his home. Word spread quickly. A temple child cast into the river. Some said it was a sign from the gods. Others whispered the old stories of chosen ones hidden in reeds, destined to overthrow kings. The high priest ordered a search, but none dared question Khemu, the silent fisherman who now guarded the child with the ferocity of a lion and the devotion of a father. Meanwhile, Anippe watched from afar, a shadow in her own life, haunting alleyways and ancient corridors, always close, never seen. Her son was alive, but her world was dying. She had buried her name the night she gave him up. What remained was only a ghost and one promise. She would protect them both, even from behind the veil, because what the Nile had taken, it had also returned. And somewhere in the murmur of reeds and river, the gods were still watching. Khemu stared at the boy as he slept in a bed of old wool beside the hearth, his tiny chest rising and falling like the breath of the Nile itself. The child hadn't cried since the day Khemu pulled him from the reeds. Not once. That silence frightened him more than crocodiles ever could. The boy's presence filled the hut with something sacred, something heavy. Each morning, the sun seemed to shine brighter upon their doorstep, and each evening, strange herons circled above his roof as if guarding a secret from the sky. Khemu had lived long enough to know when the gods were watching, and they were watching now. The villagers noticed the change in him. Once silent and brooding, Khemu now walked with a purpose, his eyes alert, his shoulders broader. But there was danger too. Whispers floated through the markets of Thebes like sand in the wind. A cursed child pulled from the Nile, a fisherman defying fate, a mother who vanished without punishment. It wasn't long before the high priest's ears caught the tale. In the great temple of Horus, beneath stone falcons and golden columns, the high priest Hetep held court over the sacred and the damned. He was old but sharp-eyed, with skin like carved ivory, and a voice that echoed like thunder even in whispers. When the story reached him, he didn't speak. He simply rose from his throne, walked to the inner sanctum, and closed the door behind him. There, in the silence of the gods, he placed both hands on the altar and whispered, "He lives." The candles flickered. He remembered the girl, Anippe, her beauty like a sunrise, her defiance sharper than obsidian. He had tried to break her, but she escaped before her punishment could be sealed. Now her child breathed in the world, and Hetep felt the old prophecy stir like a jackal in the dark. A child born from flame and reed shall expose the false and walk among kings. The priest ordered a scribe to bring every name of every infant born within the past month, and Kemu's name was among them, not for a child of his own, but for a grain surplus he had taken in trade. That was enough. The temple guards set out before dawn. Meanwhile, Anippe watched the temple from the shadows of a crumbling statue, her feet blistered, her veil ragged. She had seen the guards move. The priest emerged with fury burning behind his gold-lined eyes. She understood then. Her child had not vanished into myth. He had become it. She would not run this time. She followed the guards at a distance, her feet knowing the way even as her mind burned with fear. Kemu, meanwhile, sensed the shift in the wind. He had lived through plague, war, and betrayal. He recognized the stillness that comes before ruin. That night, he packed the child and some dried fish in a leather pouch. He didn't speak to anyone. He simply walked, with the boy strapped to his chest, into the marshes beyond the village, seeking the protection of old spirits and forgotten gods. But danger had already moved. The temple guards arrived at his hut to find only ash and feathers. And the high priest, furious but calm, whispered to his scribe, "Let them run. Fate never hides for long." He smiled, for he knew what few did. The child was marked, and the gods had a cruel sense of humor. The marshes beyond Thebes were not meant for men. Locals called them the fields of the forgotten, where the spirits of drowned slaves and banished queens whispered in the reeds, and jackals refused to hunt. But Kemu moved through them like a man possessed, water rising to his knees, leeches clinging to his legs, the child cradled to his chest, warm against the chill of the night. He knew he couldn't return to Thebes. He couldn't even stay near it. The high priest would never let go of a secret once he tasted its edge. Every mile deeper into the marshes meant more isolation, more danger, but also more time. Time to think, time to plan, time to understand who this child truly was. On the third day, the boy opened his eyes. They were unlike anything Kemu had ever seen. Not black, not brown, not hazel, but gold, pure, clear gold, like melted sun trapped behind glass. Kemu stepped back, stunned, nearly dropping his catch of fish. The child stared without blinking, then smiled. It wasn't a smile of innocence. It was the kind of smile that came with knowledge, ancient, painful knowledge. Kemu fell to his knees. "Who are you?" he whispered. That night, he built a small altar near a half-dead sycamore, placed the child in front of it, and offered a prayer to every god he remembered. Osiris to protect the dead, Isis to shield the motherless, Thoth to grant understanding. But none answered, except the wind. The wind carried a scent he recognized, lotus and ash, and behind it came a whisper, "Protect him, or all will burn." Kemu turned quickly, but no one was there, except the child, staring calmly at the tree as if it had spoken. Elsewhere, Anippe stood before an old woman in a cave hidden beneath the broken cliffs of Jebba. The woman was known only as Nebet, the widow of curses. She had once been a temple scribe, banished for scribing forbidden names into scrolls that should have never existed. Now she served those who had no names, no homes, no mercy. Anippe fell to her knees. "They'll kill him," she choked. "They'll twist his story before he can write it himself." Nebet looked at her with clouded eyes and said, "Then you must burn the ink before it dries." She placed a scarab into Anippe's palm. It was carved from black stone and warm to the touch. "This will lead you to him, but only if you accept what you must become." "And what is that?" Anippe whispered. A mother without mercy, a curse to the liars, a ghost who walks in daylight. At that moment, deep in the marshes, Camus spotted movement near the trees. A boy, no more than 12, barefoot and covered in white clay, stood watching him. When Camus raised his spear, the boy didn't move. "The gods told me where to find you," the boy said. "He's not just yours now. He's ours." Camus stared, torn between fear and trust. But when the child in his arms reached out toward the clay-covered boy and giggled for the first time, Camus knew the world had shifted again. He was no longer running. He was part of something bigger, something ancient. By the time the moon had climbed high over the marshes, the boy in white clay had led Camus to a place no map dared mark. A ring of black stones half buried in the earth, older than the pyramids and carved with symbols even temple scribes had forgotten. The child in Camus' arms stirred as they entered, his golden eyes flickering open again as if the place itself had summoned him home. The boy in clay knelt and touched the center stone. "This is where the old names were hidden," he said, "before they were stolen, before they were erased." Camus didn't understand, not fully, but he could feel something ancient stir beneath his feet, like a drumbeat deep inside the land, pulsing through stone and soil and bone. "What's your name, boy?" Camus asked. The boy stood. "We do not carry names here. Names are prisons. But they called me Nenu." "Who's they?" "Those who came before, the ones who wait." Before Camus could speak, the infant let out a strange sound, not a cry, but a laugh mixed with a whisper, too soft to make sense, too sharp to ignore. Nenu tilted his head. "He remembers," he said. "They all do, in time." Back in Thebes, the high priest Hetep stood over the fire pit in his private chamber, his hand bleeding into the flame. He had summoned the oracle of smoke, an art long forbidden, even among the elite. The flames twisted into faces. One was a fisherman, one a veiled woman, and the third, a child with golden eyes. Hetep's expression darkened. "The prophecy was never about royalty," he murmured. "It was about memory. This child is memory itself." He turned to his guards. "Gather the circle of 13. The old oaths must be broken. We rewrite fate tonight." Meanwhile, Anippe clutched the black scarab, running through ruined fields, her feet raw, her soul blistered. She hadn't eaten in days, but something stronger than hunger kept her upright, a thread tugging her forward through paths no one else could see. When she slept, she dreamed of her son. Not as a child, but as a man wrapped in flame, lifting fallen gods from tombs made of silence. She awoke in tears, not from fear, but awe. She reached the edge of the marshes by dusk, and as the scarab grew warm in her palm, she knew she was close. In the ring of stones, Nenu poured red ochre into the cracks of the earth and spoke to Camus in whispers older than speech. "You must give him a new name," Nenu said. "One not born of man or temple." Camus hesitated, then looked down at the child. "You are Sayin, son of the reeds." The wind answered with a sudden gust, sending ripples across the marsh water and bending the grasses to one side. Nenu smiled. "Now he's truly here." That night 3 shadows approached the circle. Not guards, not priests. Hunters of the 13, cloaked men whose blades were dipped in poison and whose eyes bore no whites. They did not speak, they only killed. But as they stepped into the circle, the earth beneath them cracked. The black stones pulsed red. And from the trees behind them, Anippe stepped forward with fire in her hand and madness in her stare. Anippe's veil slipped from her head as the wind surged around her, flames dancing up her forearms but not consuming her. The scarab, still clenched in her fist, glowed like molten coal, pulsing with every heartbeat. The 3 assassins, silent blades of the 13, froze mid-step, sensing something ancient awaken in her presence. They had hunted rebels, sorcerers, and traitors of the court, but never had they faced a woman who returned from the edge of death carrying the scent of forgotten gods. Anippe did not speak. She let the fire speak for her. With a sudden motion, she hurled the first flame. It struck the tallest assassin in the chest, searing through his armor, not with heat, but with memory. He screamed not from pain, but from the vision that burst into his mind. A child drowning, a god weeping, a throne cracked in half. He fell, clutching his head, and the marsh swallowed him whole. The other two lunged, blades flashing, but Nenu was already moving. With clay still coating his limbs, he darted like a reed-thin shadow, slipping behind one and striking his spine with a carved bone staff. The man crumpled silently. The third assassin turned toward the child, Sa-En, who now sat upright in Kemu's arms, golden eyes wide, unblinking. The blade never reached him. Kemu, though a fisherman, swung his spear with the strength of a father who had lost once and would never lose again. The point drove into the assassin's throat, and silence returned. Anippe dropped to her knees, gasping. She looked at Kemu, then at the boy. "You gave him a name," she whispered. "He needed one," Kemu said, blood on his hands. "He needed more than a hiding place." Anippe crawled toward her child, reached out with trembling fingers. "Sayen," she whispered, and he looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. A faint smile curled at his lips. It broke her. She buried her face in his belly, sobbing into the child she had let go to save, only to find again in the wild teeth of fate. "We're not safe," Kemu said, and after a moment, "They'll come again, stronger." "Then we must go where they cannot follow," Nenu said. "There is a place where only truth survives, where the desert eats lies and spits out light." "Where?" "The ruins of fire, beyond the red dunes. Only the condemned walk there. But he," Nenu pointed to Sa-En, "is no ordinary child. He was never meant to be raised by men." That night they burned the bodies of the assassins, letting the smoke carry a message to the sky. "We are not running. We are remembering." Far across the sands in the Temple of Horus, Hetep stood before the circle of 13, 11 now, after the silence of the marsh ambush. "They have fire," one whispered. "They have prophecy," muttered another. Hetep raised his staff. "Then we give them fear," he said. "If they walk into the ruins of fire, we'll bury them beneath it. The gods are watching, but they remember who writes the stories." Outside, the stars shifted, and in the heavens above, an ancient god long exiled stirred in his sleep. For the child of reeds had awakened something even the gods had forgotten, the power of a mother who had nothing left to lose. The red dunes rose like a frozen wave across the horizon, each crest a bleeding memory of war, exile, and burnt offerings. Few dared cross them. Fewer still returned. But Anippe led the way, feet torn, veil discarded, hair wild with dust and defiance. She held Sa-En to her chest as if the boy's golden eyes could pierce the heat itself. Beside her, Kemu dragged a makeshift sled of supplies, and Nenu, the clay-covered child, marked symbols in the sand with every step. "We walk in silence," Nenu warned, "or the ruins will remember the wrong names." By midday, the wind had turned against them, biting their faces and peeling skin like a jealous god. But still they walked. Sa-En never cried. He clung to Anippe's chest like he had been born for the journey, his tiny hand gripping her collarbone as if anchoring her to the earth. As the sun reached its zenith, they saw it. A ring of stone half buried in sand, encircling what looked like a sunken temple. The ruins of fire. They stepped inside. At once, the wind stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Time itself seemed to hesitate. No sound moved within those ruins except the crunch of their footsteps and the low, rhythmic hum that came from the walls. Chanting without voices, memory without mouths. Anippe tightened her grip on Sa-En. "What is this place?" she asked. Nenu knelt and ran his hands across the carvings in the stone. "It was once a court of truth," he whispered, "before pharaohs ruled by blood. Here only memory had power, and only the unafraid could speak." Kemu lowered his spear. "So why did it burn?" "Because truth is the only thing more dangerous than lies." They entered a central chamber lit by a shaft of light from a cracked ceiling. In the center lay a giant slab of obsidian, smooth as still water. As they approached, the slab rippled. Not literally, but something beneath it remembered being touched. Anippe stepped forward. Her reflection on the surface was not herself. It was a younger her, in temple robes, smiling beside a man whose face was blurred by smoke. She staggered back. "It shows what you've buried," Nenu said. "It shows what the gods refuse to forget." Then Cyan wriggled from her arms, toddled to the slab, and placed both palms on it. The obsidian flared gold. Symbols burst across the surface, ancient words that none of them recognized, yet all felt in their bones. Then the slab cracked, a long, slow fracture from edge to edge. Light poured from beneath it, and from the shadows around the chamber, cloaked figures emerged. Not guards, not assassins. Watchers, burned faces, blind eyes. "He has awoken the archive," one whispered. "Then it has begun," said another. Anippe pulled her child close. "Who are you?" she demanded. The watchers knelt. "We are the forgotten, the voices that history buried. He has broken the silence." Khemu stood between them and the child. "Then speak plainly. What does he mean to you?" A watcher stepped forward, skin like dried leather, voice like crumbling stone. "He is not your son alone. He is the return of what was erased, the last name that survived the fire." Anippe felt her knees weaken. "He is my blood," she said. "He is not yours to use." "Then protect him," said the watcher, turning to go. "For now the high priest comes not to silence him, but to enslave him. And fire is no longer your only enemy." The shadows retreated, and the light from the cracked stone burned into the shape of a symbol, half sun, half eye. Cyan pointed to it and whispered his first word. Truth. In the heart of Thebes, the temple bells rang, not in celebration, but as a signal of dread. The high priest Hetep stood on the highest balcony of the temple of Horus, robes trailing behind him like the smoke of a cursed offering. His face was calm, but his eyes were storms. Word had reached him through falcons and spies. The ruins had awakened. The archive had cracked. The child had spoken, and worse. Truth had been named aloud. "Then we burn it all," he whispered. "If history dares to rise, we will bury it beneath ash again." He summoned his inner circle. Not priests, not scribes. Magi, the old kind. Men and women whose tongues had been removed in exchange for power, whose blood had been changed to ink so they could write curses with a single drop. "Find the child. Mark the land with salt. And when you reach the woman who bore him, take her eyes. She's seen too much." Meanwhile, the ruins of fire had turned silent again. The watchers vanished, the cracked obsidian now cool, the golden flare gone, but the mark remained scorched into the stone. Cyan slept, curled between Anippe and Khemu. Nenu sat cross-legged at the edge of the ruin, whispering to the sand. "They'll come tonight," he said, "but the ruins will test them before they can harm us." Khemu's hands wrapped around the leather grip of his spear. "And if they pass, then blood must speak where words no longer can." Anippe stared into the fire, remembering how it felt when her child first cried in her arms, and then how it felt when she placed him into the river, thinking it would be the last time she saw him. But the Nile had given him back. The gods had chosen her to lose everything so she could become something no priest could control, a mother with nothing left to fear. That night the earth trembled, not from an army, but from the footsteps of 13 magi who walked without speaking, their faces marked with ash, their hearts replaced with silence. They reached the edge of the ruins, and the sand beneath them vanished. Screams echoed as 3 disappeared into the earth, swallowed whole. The rest kept walking. In the center chamber, the air thickened, the wind dying inside itself. The torches flickered. Khemu stood at the entrance, ready. Nenu painted symbols on the stone with a mixture of clay and blood. Anippe pressed her forehead to Cyan's. "If I fall, run," she whispered. "If we all fall, remember." Then the Magi arrived. The first entered with a gesture that sent fire sweeping across the walls. The ruins answered, not with flames, but with memory. Their fire turned to sand mid-air and collapsed. Another Magus threw a scroll of death toward Nenu, but the symbols he had drawn pulsed and threw it back with twice the force. Still they advanced. Still they whispered curses without tongues. One reached Sai-En and froze, not from fear, but from recognition. She knelt before the boy, trembling. "He bears the mark," she whispered. "He is the ink they tried to kill." Then her eyes turned black, and she collapsed into dust. Anippe rose with the scarab in her palm and shouted, "You've stolen stories for too long. Now let truth speak through flame." She struck the floor. The obsidian cracked again, this time into 1,000 veins of light. Each wall blazed with stories that had been erased. Peasants who had healed royalty, children born of servants who had changed dynasties, women who had carried prophecy in silence. And in the center of it all, a baby wrapped in reeds, surrounded by fire that did not burn him. Hetep, watching from afar through a mirror of scrying glass, smashed it in rage. "Then let the whole city burn," he roared. But it was already too late, because in one ruined temple, truth had found breath, and it would no longer be silent. The morning sun rose blood-red over Thebes, and for the first time in decades, its light did not fall gently upon the temple of Horus. It struck the marble hard, like accusation, like judgment. Streets once lined with silent worshippers now filled with murmurs, whispers spreading faster than flame. "The ruins have spoken! A child with golden eyes. The gods are angry with Hetep." No one knew where the rumors began, but they refused to die. The market women heard them between the clinks of copper. Soldiers passed them like invisible arrows. Scribes scribbled faster, unsure what to erase and what to keep. For in Thebes, stories were power, and this one was out of the priest's reach. In the shadowed heart of the ruined fire temple, Sai-En awoke with a start. His eyes shone brighter than ever, as if they had caught fire from the stone itself. "They know," he whispered. "They all know now." Anippe sat beside him, still trembling from the night's battle, the scarab warm in her palm, pulsing like a second heart. Khemu crouched at the chamber's edge, spear across his knees, eyes scanning every crack for movement. Nenu was nowhere to be seen. "He left before dawn," Khemu said. "He said Thebes must hear it not through whispers, but from the wind." Anippe's chest tightened. "He's just a child." "So is mine," she said, pulling Sai-En closer. But even as she said it, she saw something in her son's face, a calm that didn't belong to a child, a patience born of ages. He was no longer just hers. Back in the city, Nenu had climbed to the highest platform overlooking the riverbanks. He raised his arms and began to chant, not in the language of men, but of stone and water and time. The wind carried his voice like a spell. The reeds along the river's edge swayed. Birds took flight, and then the river changed direction. For one full minute, the Nile flowed backwards. Gasps turned to screams. Priests dropped their scrolls. Even Hetep, locked inside the temple's deepest vault, felt the tremor in his bones. "Find the boy," he hissed. "Bring him here, alive or broken." His guards moved like hounds, but the people moved faster. In alleyways and corridors, mothers whispered San's name. Men carved his mark, the half-sun, half-eye, onto walls. An old scribe, blind in one eye, began writing again after 20 years of silence. "The fire child lives," he said. "Truth breathes." Meanwhile, Anippe stood at the threshold of the ruin with Sai-En. Khemu beside her, weary but unbroken. They knew the ruins could protect them no longer. The gods had done their part. Now it was up to them. "We go to the city," Anippe said, "through the front gate." "They'll kill us," Khemu warned. "Then let them try," she said, eyes burning. "We've died 100 deaths in silence already." As they stepped out, a caravan of villagers waited, holding food, cloth, water. None spoke. They simply nodded. The wind carried their steps toward Thebes. On the highest temple tower, Hetep watched with clenched fists. "So be it," he growled. "Let truth try to walk through a city built on lies. Let's see how far it gets." But far below, Sa-En smiled. Because truth had never needed permission to rise. It only needed the courage to be carried and the will to endure the fire. The gates of Thebes had never opened for a fisherman, a veiled woman, and a barefoot child. But they did that morning. Not by the order of the priests, not by the guards, by the people. The crowd gathered in silence, then parted without command as Anippe, Khemu, and Sa-En walked through, the half-sun, half-eye symbol chalked on walls, carved into doors, etched into memory. The old remembered it. The young had never seen it, yet still felt its pull. And the priests, for all their power, couldn't erase what had now rooted itself in the soil of men's hearts. High Priest Hetep stood at the top of the temple steps, flanked by elite guards in golden armor, eyes cold as Nile stone. "You walk into death," he called, voice loud enough to silence the square. Anippe stepped forward, holding Sa-En. "No," she said. "I walk into what you tried to bury, and he—" She placed the child down gently on the steps. "Walks into the throne you burned." Hetep descended one step. "This child is born of sin. His blood stains the god's house." "His blood," Khemu growled, stepping forward with a spear in hand, "was nearly drowned by yours." Gasps, murmurs. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Let her speak." Another, "Let him be tested if you believe he's false." Hetep raised his staff. "Enough! You are fooled by myth and madness. The gods do not speak through peasants and bastards." But the ground began to hum. Not shake, hum. A low vibration beneath sandals and stone. The temple doors behind Hetep creaked, without touch, without wind. Slowly, they opened. And from within came a voice none expected. Ancient, gravel-thick, and weary. Lies rot even granite. All turned. It was the old oracle. Blind, thought dead, never seen in public since Pharaoh Den's father ruled. She stepped forward, eyes covered with gold silk, arms trembling, supported by two young acolytes. The last time truth walked these steps, it bled, but it rose again, because fire does not kill what is born to illuminate. She turned to Hetep. "You were given the scrolls of memory. You used them to erase names." "For order!" Hetep shouted. "For peace! For control!" the oracle snapped. "You silenced prophets, burned midwives, banished those who remembered the stories you feared, but you forgot one thing. Truth can be reborn in a whisper, in a wound, in a reed." Then she faced Sa-En. "Do you know who you are, child?" Sa-En stepped forward, placing his small hand over the oracle's. "I know who they were," he said. "And I remember everything." The wind roared. All torches across the temple courtyard flared white, then blue. The hieroglyphs carved into temple pillars glowed. Onlookers fell to their knees. Then came the final sign. The obelisk, tallest in Thebes, untouched for generations, cracked down the center. From within it, light burst in a narrow beam that hit the very spot where Sa-En stood. He did not flinch. Hetep screamed. He ran forward with his blade, roaring like a wild beast. But Khemu stepped in front. So did Anippe. So did villagers. So did strangers. Hetep stopped, looked around, and realized no one followed him anymore. He dropped the blade, dropped to his knees, and finally dropped into silence. Because in that moment, a city saw not a rebel, not a curse, not a lie. They saw a child, wrapped in the fire of memory, born from river and ruin. And they remembered. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the cliffs of Thebes, the city held its breath, not from fear, but from awe. The fires that once threatened to consume truth now lit the streets as offerings. People brought papyrus scrolls, broken amulets, family relics, symbols of stories once silenced, and laid them at the base of the temple steps. In the center of it all stood Sa-En, barely able to speak in full sentences, yet speaking in a way no one had before. His golden eyes scanned the crowd. He didn't need to shout. When he opened his mouth, his words rippled across stone and skin and memory. No name should be erased, he said softly. No story buried. Anippe stood beside him, hand on his shoulder, no longer hiding behind a veil. Her face bore scars, sunburn, and strength. The people looked at her like they would a queen, not of lineage, but of survival. Khemu, dressed still in his fisherman's tunic, stood with his spear planted beside him. He had no title, yet every eye that met his carried gratitude. Because without him, the child of the river would have been lost. The oracle approached, placing a carved tablet before Sayen. "This is the stone of the future," she said. "It has been blank for 5 generations. Only a child unowned by palace or priest may write upon it." San took the stylus, hands small but steady. The crowd leaned forward. He carved, not words, but symbols. A reed, a mother's eye, a broken chain, a child held by many hands. The wind shifted, and the temple pillars trembled, not from collapse, but from awakening. The carvings along the walls rewrote themselves, erasing Hetep's edits, returning truth to names long scratched out. Below the temple of Horus, in dark chambers no longer sealed, scribes found scrolls thought destroyed. Midwives who had lived in silence for years emerged and began telling truths that no law could now punish. The high priest Hetep was not executed. He was exiled, not to a prison, but to a shrine without worship. His name stripped from every wall, his voice denied even by echoes. That was the final justice. Truth didn't kill him. It erased him. Anippe and Sayen did not remain in Thebes. They returned to the Marshes, not in hiding, but in peace. There, others came, those whose stories had been stolen, whose children had been taken, whose voices had once been dismissed as madness. Together they built a new temple, not of stone, but of memory. They called it the House of Reeds. Children learned not only the names of gods and kings, but of potters, dancers, healers, mothers. Sayen grew, not into a pharaoh, but into a keeper of truth. When he walked through the city, no guards followed, only laughter, stories, and the scent of lotus in the wind. The story of the boy in the reeds became legend. But unlike other legends, this one was not locked in myth. It was written, carved, remembered, not for its fire or miracles, but because it reminded people that truth was not a thing to be granted. It was a birthright, and the Nile, in its eternal wisdom, carried that truth into every future, like a reed basket floating forward, untouched by time.